What happens when nature's fiercest predator is left all alone? This tiger cub faced unimaginable loss, but fate led it to an unlikely bond that defied all instincts. Can love truly transcend species? How did this orphaned cub find comfort in the most unexpected place? And what does this heartwarming friendship teach us about family and acceptance? Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the wild. Kaziranga National Park was alive with the sounds of the wild. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming foliage as the morning sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the jungle floor. Birds chattered among the branches, their vibrant feathers flickering like jewels in the sunlight, while distant calls of monkeys echoed across the treetops. Amidst this thriving ecosystem, a heartbreaking scene lay hidden beneath a thicket of tall grass. Taro's tiny body trembled as he nudged the still, unresponsive form of his mother. Her majestic figure lay sprawled across the ground, her once brilliant orange and black fur marred by dirt and dried blood. Her eyes, once fierce and vigilant, were now dull, staring blankly into the nothingness. The metallic scent of death hung heavily in the air, mingling with the acrid odor of gunpowder. The cub whimpered softly, his small voice lost amidst the cacophony of the jungle. His mother didn't stir. She wouldn't wake, no matter how desperately he pawed at her. A rustling sound nearby made Taro's ears twitch, and he scrambled backward, stumbling over his own paws. His golden eyes were wide with fear, his heart racing as he instinctively crouched low, trying to make himself as small as possible. The grass parted and a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in olive-green ranger attire, Ethan Turner scanned the scene before him, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. His jaw tightened as his eyes fell upon the lifeless tiger, her flank marked with bullet wounds. Poachers. His fists clenched, fury bubbling within him. He had patrolled these grounds for years, fighting to protect the wildlife from those who sought to destroy it for profit. But he had arrived too late this time. Ethan's anger gave way to sorrow as he noticed the tiny, quivering form huddled beside the fallen tigress. The cub looked up at him, its eyes wide and brimming with fear and confusion. Ethan's heart ached at the sight. He had seen orphaned animals before, victims of greed and cruelty. But something about this cub's helplessness struck him to his core. He knew the brutal reality awaiting this little one. Without its mother, the cub wouldn't survive long. Alone in the unforgiving wilderness, starvation or predators would claim its life. The jungle was no place for an orphan. He took a cautious step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, trying not to startle the cub. "Hey there, little guy," he murmured, his voice gentle, soothing. Taro flinched, his tiny body pressing closer to his mother's side, as if willing her to protect him one last time. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't just an orphan cub. This was a baby who had just lost the only family he'd ever known. The cub's mournful eyes clung to his mother, still seeking comfort, warmth, safety, all the things she could no longer provide. Ethan knelt down, his knees sinking into the damp earth. He reached out a hand slowly, palm up, letting Taro catch his scent. The cub sniffed cautiously, his nose twitching as he took in the unfamiliar smell. Ethan's fingers were mere inches away when Taro let out a tiny, pitiful growl, a feeble attempt to sound fierce. Ethan couldn't help but smile, his heart softening. "You've got spirit, kid. Your mom would be proud." The cub's growl faded into a whimper, his energy waning. He was exhausted, hungry, and scared. His tiny body trembled as he looked from Ethan to his mother and back again, his golden eyes pleading for an answer to a question he didn't understand. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He was a ranger, sworn to protect the wildlife, to let nature take its course. But what kind of justice was this? What kind of life awaited this cub if he left him here? His gaze flicked back to the tigress, her body already attracting flies. No, he couldn't leave him. Not like this. He made his decision. Moving slowly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a blanket, draping it carefully over the cub. Taro resisted weakly, his tiny claws batting at the fabric, but he was too tired to fight. His struggles ceased as the warmth enveloped him, his eyes growing heavy. "It's okay, little one," Ethan whispered, his voice gentle as he scooped the cub into his arms. "I've got you now." Taro's body tensed, his instincts screaming to escape, but exhaustion overruled fear, and his head drooped against Ethan's chest. He could hear the steady rhythm of the man's heartbeat, a comforting thud that soothed his frayed nerves. Ethan held the cub securely, his grip firm yet tender. He knew the risks of what he was doing. Taking a wild animal, especially a tiger, wasn't just dangerous, it was controversial. But leaving him here meant certain death. He couldn't do that. Ethan stood up, his muscles straining under the cub's weight, and turned to leave. He paused, glancing back at the fallen tigress. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice low, filled with regret. "I couldn't save you, but I promise I'll take care of him." With that, he began his journey back through the jungle, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor. Taro lay limp in his arms, his tiny body exhausted from fear and grief. Yet as they moved away from the scene of loss, a faint warmth began to spread through him, the comfort of being held, of hearing a heartbeat that wasn't his own. For the first time since his mother's death, Taro felt a sliver of safety. Above them, the sun continued its ascent, its golden light spilling across the treetops, washing the jungle in hues of green and gold. The world moved on, indifferent to the pain of one small cub. But for Taro, everything had changed. His life as a wild tiger was over, but his story was just beginning. The Wildlife Rescue Center was a bustling hub of activity, a sanctuary nestled at the edge of the jungle where injured and orphaned animals were given a second chance at life. Ranger Ethan Turner arrived with Taro cradled securely in his arms, the cub's tiny body curled up against his chest, eyes tightly shut. The journey had been long, and exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them. As Ethan stepped through the main gate, a wave of curiosity swept through the center. Caretakers and volunteers gathered, whispering in hushed tones as they noticed the lifeless tigress draped across the back of his jeep and the small bundle he carried. Dr. Anaya Singh, the head veterinarian, rushed forward, her expression shifting from concern to compassion as she saw Taro's fragile form. "Oh, Ethan, another victim?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with sorrow. Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched as he fought to control his emotions. "Poachers got her. I found the cub next to her body. He wouldn't have survived the night." Anaya's eyes softened as she reached out, gently brushing her fingers over Taro's head. "Poor little thing. He must be terrified and starving. Let's get him inside." They moved swiftly through the center, passing enclosures filled with other rescued animals, injured deer, orphaned monkeys, and birds with broken wings. Taro's nose twitched as unfamiliar scents bombarded his senses, but he remained motionless, too weak to react. They entered the infirmary, a bright, sterile room lined with metal tables and shelves stocked with medical supplies. Anaya guided Ethan to a padded table where he carefully laid Taro down. The cub whimpered, his tiny body shivering despite the warmth of the room. Anaya's heart tightened at the sight. "He's dehydrated and malnourished. We need to get some fluids into him fast," she instructed, already gathering supplies. Ethan watched in silence as Anaya worked with practiced precision, inserting an IV line to administer fluids and checking Taro's vital signs. The cub's breathing was shallow, his heartbeat faint but steady. Anaya's face remained calm, but Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. "Will he make it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Anaya hesitated before answering, her gaze never leaving the cub. "He's weak, but he's a fighter. If we can get him stable, he has a chance." The room fell into a focused silence, broken only by the soft beeps of the medical equipment. Ethan stood by Taro's side, his hand resting gently on the cub's back, feeling the fragile rise and fall of his breathing. Memories flooded his mind, visions of the jungle, the fallen tigress, and the haunting eyes of the helpless cub. Guilt gnawed at him, a painful reminder that he hadn't been able to save Taro's mother. But he could save him. He had to. After hours of care, Taro's condition began to stabilize. His breathing deepened, his body relaxing as the warmth of the infirmary and the nutrients from the IV revived his weary form. Anaya let out a sigh of relief, her shoulders sagging as the tension left her body. "He's going to pull through, at least for now." Ethan's heart lifted at her words, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "Thank you, Anaya." I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled softly, wiping her hands on a towel. It's not over yet. He's lost his mother and his entire world. He'll need more than just medical care. He needs comfort, security, a reason to keep fighting. Ethan knew she was right. The cub had lost more than his health. He had lost his family, his identity. They needed to find a way to heal his broken heart. Anaya's eyes brightened with an idea. Bella? Ethan looked at her, puzzled. Bella? Your golden retriever? Anaya nodded, her expression thoughtful. She just had a litter of puppies. Her maternal instincts are strong right now. Maybe she could help him feel safe, help him adjust. Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. A dog raising a tiger cub? It sounded absurd. But then he remembered Taro's desperate cries, his tiny body clinging to his mother's lifeless form. The cub needed love, warmth, family. It's worth a try, Ethan agreed, his resolve strengthening. Anything to give him a chance. Anaya smiled, a spark of hope shining in her eyes. Let's introduce them. Carefully, of course. They carried Taro to a quieter room, a cozy space lined with soft blankets and gentle lighting. Bella lay curled up in the corner, surrounded by a squirming pile of golden puppies, their tiny bodies snuggled against her warm fur. She lifted her head as they entered, her gentle brown eyes curious but calm. Anaya approached slowly, speaking in a soothing voice. Hey, Bella. I have someone who needs you. Bella's ears perked up as Anaya placed Taro beside her, his small body trembling as he whimpered softly. Bella sniffed him cautiously, her nose brushing against his fur. For a moment she seemed uncertain, her head tilting as she examined the unfamiliar creature. But then, something shifted. Bella's gaze softened, and she leaned down, licking Taro's head with a tenderness that brought tears to Ethan's eyes. She nosed him closer, wrapping her body protectively around him, her warmth enveloping the frightened cub. Taro stiffened at first, his instincts urging him to flee, but Bella's steady heartbeat and gentle touch eased his fear. He nestled against her, his tiny paws curling into her fur as his body relaxed. A soft sigh escaped his lips as he closed his eyes, his breathing evening out into a deep, peaceful rhythm. Ethan watched in awe, his chest tightening as he witnessed the miracle unfolding before him. The orphaned tiger cub had found a mother in the most unlikely of places. Anaya's voice broke the silence, her words soft with wonder. She accepted him just like that. Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. She's incredible. They both are. As they watched Bella nuzzle Taro with unwavering love, a sense of hope filled the room. Against all odds, Taro had found a new family, a chance to heal his broken heart. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and love, Taro began to dream, not of loss or fear, but of a future filled with belonging. The story of a tiger and his dog mother was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and Taro began to flourish under Bella's watchful care. The tiny, frail cub, who had once shivered in fear, was now growing stronger with each passing day. His golden-orange fur gleamed with health, his eyes bright and curious as he explored his new world. Bella never left his side, treating him no differently than her own puppies. She groomed him meticulously, licked his face clean after meals, and curled protectively around him each night, ensuring he was warm and safe. Taro, in turn, clung to her like any newborn would to its mother, his soft purrs blending harmoniously with Bella's gentle snores. The rescue center buzzed with excitement over the unusual family. Caretakers would gather at the window of Bella's den, watching with awe as the tiger cub played among the golden retriever puppies, his clumsy paws swatting at their wiggling tails. Taro had adopted their playful energy, tumbling and wrestling with his adopted siblings, his growls and meows mingling with their barks and yips. It was a curious sight, a tiger cub rolling around like a puppy, his tiny tail wagging with unrestrained joy. Yet to Taro, this was his normal. In his eyes, he was just another member of Bella's brood. One morning, Ethan arrived at the rescue center and made his way to Bella's enclosure, his heart warming at the scene before him. Taro was pouncing on a squeaky toy, his large paws landing with an awkward thud as he tried to mimic the playful leaps of his canine siblings. His coordination was improving, but his tiger instincts made his movements more powerful, more deliberate. He wasn't just playing, he was learning to hunt, albeit in the form of pouncing on a rubber bone. Bella watched him with pride, her tongue lolling out in a happy pant. To her, Taro was her son, no different from the other puppies wrestling around her feet. Ethan knelt beside the enclosure, his face breaking into a broad smile as Taro trotted over to greet him. The cub rubbed his head against the bars, a low purr vibrating through his tiny body. Ethan reached through, scratching behind Taro's ears. "Hey there, little guy. You're growing fast, aren't you?" Taro responded with a playful nip at Ethan's fingers, his sharp baby teeth grazing the ranger's skin. Ethan chuckled, unfazed by the cub's growing strength. "You're going to be a big boy soon, just like your mother was." His voice softened, his thoughts drifting back to the jungle, to the fallen tigress he hadn't been able to save. But looking at Taro now, so full of life and spirit, Ethan felt a sense of peace. At least he had been able to save her legacy. Inside the enclosure, Bella's puppies began to nurse, their tiny bodies wriggling as they jostled for space. Taro watched them curiously, his head cocked to one side. He was bigger now, his appetite growing with his size. As the puppies drank their fill, Taro leaned against Bella, his body instinctively curling into her warmth. Bella licked his head, her soft tongue smoothing down his fur, and Taro let out a contented sigh. Here, wrapped in her embrace, he felt safe. He felt loved. It was a feeling he never wanted to lose. But as Taro grew, his tiger instincts became more pronounced. He was faster, stronger than his adopted siblings, his movements more calculated. One afternoon, as the puppies chased each other around the enclosure, Taro watched them with a predatory gleam in his eye. His body lowered, his muscles tensing as he stalked his unsuspecting brothers and sisters, his tail twitching in anticipation. With a burst of speed, he pounced, his paws pinning a puppy to the ground. The pup yelped in surprise, wriggling beneath Taro's weight, but the cub merely nuzzled his sibling, his playful growl filled with affection. Yet the power behind his movements was unmistakable. He was no ordinary puppy. He was a predator in training. Bella seemed unfazed by Taro's growing strength. If anything, she became more protective, more nurturing, ensuring he never felt isolated or different. When Taro's sharp claws accidentally scratched one of the puppies, Bella intervened with a firm bark, nudging Taro away before licking his face to reassure him. Taro's eyes widened, guilt flooding his small body as he realized he had hurt his brother. He whimpered, pressing his head against Bella's chest, seeking her forgiveness. Bella's response was tender, her tongue cleaning his face as she curled around him, her body language clear. Accidents happen, but love remains. Watching this dynamic unfold, Ethan was filled with admiration for Bella's patience and wisdom. She was teaching Taro how to play gently, how to control his strength, how to be part of a pack. And Taro was learning, his sharp instincts tempered by Bella's loving discipline. Yet Ethan couldn't help but worry. How long could they maintain this delicate balance? Taro was still a cub, but soon he would grow bigger, stronger, more dangerous. Would Bella be able to protect her puppies when Taro's predatory instincts fully emerged? Would Taro even understand the difference between play and hunting? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood outside the enclosure, watching Taro and Bella snuggled together. Taro was asleep, his tiny paws twitching as he dreamed, his face serene and peaceful. Bella's head rested on his back, her body wrapped protectively around him, her eyes half closed in contentment. It was a picture of unconditional love, of a bond that defied nature itself. Ethan's heart swelled with emotion, his eyes stinging as he realized the truth. They were family. It didn't matter that one was a tiger and the other a dog. They belonged to each other, but the world wouldn't see it that way. Eventually, Taro would grow too large, too wild to stay at the rescue center. They would have to decide his future, and Ethan dreaded that day. He looked at Bella, at the unwavering love in her eyes, and whispered softly, "How am I supposed to break you two apart?" His words hung in the air, unanswered, as the golden retriever licked her adopted cub's head, a mother's love eternal and unbreakable. For now at least they were together, and that was enough. As the weeks passed, Taro continued to grow, his slender limbs gaining strength, his muscles becoming more defined, his once round face elongated, his jawline sharpening as his baby teeth were replaced by pointed fangs. He was no longer the tiny, helpless cub Ethan had rescued. Taro was transforming into a young tiger, powerful and majestic. Yet despite his changing physique, his heart remained tethered to Bella. She was his world, his constant, the only mother he had ever known. And he followed her everywhere, his massive paws padding softly behind her as she moved about the enclosure. Bella's puppies had also grown, their chubby bodies now lean and energetic as they ran circles around Taro, barking and nipping at his tail. Taro played along, his enormous frame towering over his adopted siblings, but his movements were careful, his strength restrained. He had learned how to be gentle, how to temper his power, and it was all because of Bella. She watched over them with the vigilance of a guardian, stepping in whenever play became too rough, her motherly instincts as sharp as ever. But even with Bella's nurturing influence, Taro's instincts were undeniable. He was a hunter by nature, and those primal urges grew stronger with each passing day. His once playful pounces turned into calculated ambushes, his muscular body moving with a grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. He would crouch low, his shoulders rolling as he stalked his imaginary prey, his eyes locked on a target only he could see. And when he pounced, his power was breathtaking, his body soaring through the air with a ferocity that left his canine siblings yelping in surprise. It wasn't just his hunting instincts that were emerging. Taro's voice was changing too. His playful meows deepened into growls, and one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he let out his first roar. It was a small choke sound at first, his throat unused to the vibrations. But as he tried again, the roar grew louder, more confident, echoing across the rescue center. The puppies froze, their eyes wide with fear and awe, their tails tucking between their legs as they whimpered softly. Even Bella looked up in surprise, her ears flicking at the unfamiliar sound. Taro was stunned by his own power, his golden eyes wide with confusion. He turned to Bella, his head low, his body trembling as if seeking her reassurance. Bella stood and approached him, her nose nudging his cheek, her warm tongue licking his face. She wagged her tail, her body language soft and inviting, her message clear. "You're still my boy. Nothing has changed." Taro let out a relieved whimper, pressing his massive head into her fur, his purrs vibrating through his chest. But the moment wasn't lost on Ethan, who watched from the shadows, his heart heavy with worry. Taro was growing up, too fast, too strong, and soon love alone wouldn't be enough to contain him. One afternoon, Taro's strength became dangerously apparent. He was playing with one of Bella's puppies, chasing his smaller sibling around the enclosure, his body moving with remarkable agility for his size. The puppy yipped and barked, taunting Taro as it zigzagged between his legs, its tiny tail wagging with excitement. Taro's eyes gleamed with competitive fire, his muscles rippling as he pounced. But this time, he miscalculated his power. His massive paws landed on the puppy's back, pressing it to the ground with a force that made the pup yelp in pain. Bella sprang to her feet, barking sharply as she rushed over, her body wedging between Taro and her injured pup. Her eyes were fierce, her teeth bared in a rare display of anger as she growled, her motherly instincts in full defense mode. Taro stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock and guilt. He had never seen Bella look at him like that, had never heard her growl with such ferocity. His heart sank, his tail drooping as he whimpered, his ears flattening against his head. He hadn't meant to hurt his brother. He was just playing. Wasn't he? The puppy limped away, shaken but unharmed, and Bella's posture relaxed, her eyes softening as she turned back to Taro. She approached him slowly, her head low, her body language gentle as she nuzzled his face, licking his ears with tender affection. Taro's body sagged with relief, his purrs vibrating through his chest as he pressed closer to her. She wasn't angry. She was just protecting her babies, including him. But as Bella gathered her puppies and led them to the far side of the enclosure, Taro remained behind, his massive paws rooted to the ground. He watched them cuddle together, his heart aching as he realized that no matter how much he loved Bella, he was not like her other children. He was different. Ethan watched the scene unfold, his chest tightening with concern. Taro's power was becoming uncontainable, his instincts too strong to be ignored. He could no longer deny the truth. Taro was a predator, a wild animal growing up in a world that didn't belong to him. And as much as he loved Bella, as much as he saw her as his mother, she could not change what he was. Ethan knew the day was coming when he would have to make a choice that would break Taro's heart and his own. That night, as the moon cast a silver glow over the rescue center, Taro lay curled up at the edge of the enclosure, his golden eyes watching Bella from afar. He could hear the soft whimpers of the puppies as they nursed, their tiny bodies snuggled against Bella's warm fur. But for the first time, Taro didn't join them. He stayed away, his body curled into a tight ball, his tail wrapped protectively around himself. He felt the ache of loneliness settle deep in his chest, a hollow pain that no amount of love could fill. Taro lifted his head and looked up at the moon, his eyes reflecting the light as he let out a soft, mournful roar, a sound filled with longing, confusion, and loss. It echoed through the night, a haunting melody that sent shivers down Ethan's spine as he stood outside the enclosure, his heart breaking for the cub who was no longer a cub. Taro was growing up, and nothing could stop it, not even the love of a mother who wasn't his own. Taro grew bigger, stronger, and more magnificent with each passing day. His once tiny paws were now powerful, capable of sending vibrations through the ground with every step. His sleek, muscular body rippled with energy, his striped fur gleaming under the sunlight. His eyes, once wide with innocence, were now sharp and calculating, his gaze penetrating and intense. He was no longer the fragile cub Ethan had cradled in his arms. He was a young tiger, regal and wild. Yet despite his imposing presence, Taro remained gentle around Bella. She was still his mother, his comfort, the center of his world. But as he continued to grow, the world around him seemed to shrink. The enclosure that had once been a vast playground now felt confining. Taro would pace along the perimeter, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his senses tingling with curiosity. He could hear the distant calls of wild animals, the rustle of leaves in the jungle beyond, the whispers of freedom. It stirred something inside him, a longing he didn't understand. It was a call he couldn't ignore, a pull towards a world he had never known but felt destined to be a part of. And yet every time he turned to look at Bella, curled up with her puppies, his heart tightened, his resolve wavering. How could he leave her? She was his family, his home, but the changes were becoming undeniable. Taro's playful nature had shifted into something more primal, more instinctive. He no longer wrestled with Bella's puppies, his enormous size and strength making him a danger without meaning to be. His siblings began to fear him, their playful barks turning into yelps as they scrambled to avoid his powerful swipes. It broke Taro's heart. He didn't want to hurt them, but he couldn't control his strength. Even his voice was different. His growls were deeper, his roars louder, echoing through the rescue center and sending shivers down the spines of everyone who heard them. Ethan watched the transformation with a heavy heart, his worst fears coming true. Taro was no longer a cub, no longer the small, helpless creature he had saved. He was a predator, a force of nature, and he didn't belong in captivity. The other animals grew restless whenever Taro was near, their instincts alerting them to his presence, their fear palpable. Even Bella's demeanor was changing. Although she still loved Taro fiercely, she had become more cautious, her maternal instincts conflicted. She could sense his power, his danger, but she could also see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. He was her son, but he was also a tiger. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Taro paced restlessly along the fence, his body tense, his muscles coiled like springs. He could hear the jungle beyond, the world he had never known but felt calling to him. He let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line, his tail lashing behind him. Bella watched him from a distance, her puppies snuggled against her side, her eyes sad and knowing. She could feel the change in Taro, the yearning that had taken root in his heart. He was no longer content in his confined world. He wanted more, needed more. That night, Taro didn't sleep. He stood at the edge of the enclosure, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. His ears perked as he listened to the nocturnal symphony beyond the fence. He could hear the distant roar of another tiger, the sound vibrating through his bones, awakening something ancient and primal within him. His body trembled, his heart pounding as he let out his own roar, powerful and commanding, his voice merging with the jungle's chorus. It was the first time he felt truly alive, truly himself. But as his roar faded, he heard a whimper behind him. He turned to see Bella, her eyes wide with sadness, her body low as she approached him. Taro's heart sank. He padded over to her, his head low, his eyes pleading. He nuzzled her face, his rough tongue licking her cheek as he tried to reassure her. But Bella's eyes were filled with sorrow, her body pressed tightly against his, as if she knew he was slipping away. She licked his face, her warmth soothing his restless spirit, and for a moment, Taro closed his eyes, allowing himself to sink into her love. But when he opened them again, his gaze drifted back to the horizon, his heart torn between two worlds. Ethan stood outside the enclosure, his chest aching as he watched the emotional exchange. He knew what was coming. Taro was ready, ready to leave, ready to embrace the wildness that had always been inside him. But how could he separate them? How could he take Taro away from the only mother he had ever known? How could he break Bella's heart? Yet keeping Taro here was no longer an option. He was too strong, too powerful, his instincts too fierce. The rescue center was not his home, the jungle was calling him, and Ethan had to let him go. The next morning, Ethan made the hardest decision of his life. He gathered the staff and explained his plan. They would take Taro to the edge of the jungle, to a protected area where he could learn to hunt, to be wild, to be free. It was a chance for him to live as he was meant to, a tiger in his natural habitat. But they would do it gradually, monitoring him from a distance, ensuring his safety until he was fully adapted. It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do. But it felt like a betrayal. When they came to take him, Taro resisted, his massive body pressing against Bella's, his growls low and pleading. Bella whimpered, licking his face, her paws clutching at his fur as if trying to hold him in place. The sight shattered Ethan's heart, his vision blurring as he fought back tears. Taro's roars were filled with anguish, his eyes wide with fear as they led him away, his body straining against the restraints. He called for Bella, his voice echoing through the center, his desperation palpable. Bella howled, her body pressed against the fence. Her eyes locked on Taro until he disappeared from view. Ethan stayed with her long after Taro was gone, his hand resting on her back as she whimpered softly, her body trembling with grief. "I'm sorry, Bella," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry." Bella's eyes never left the horizon, her ears straining to hear the roar that no longer came. She lay down, her head resting on her paws, her heart breaking for the son she had lost. And somewhere deep in the jungle, Taro roared, his voice raw and aching, his spirit torn between the freedom he longed for and the family he could never forget. The jungle was vast, wild, and teeming with life. For weeks, Taro roamed its depths, his powerful body weaving through the dense undergrowth with a grace that came naturally to him. He moved like a shadow, his golden-striped fur blending seamlessly with the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Here, in the heart of the wilderness, he was free. No walls, no fences, nothing to contain his strength or spirit. Yet despite the endless horizon and the intoxicating scent of freedom, Taro felt incomplete. His heart ached with a longing he couldn't shake, a hollowness that grew each time he awoke alone. No warm body curled against his side, no familiar scent to calm his restless soul. He missed Bella. The days were filled with exploration and survival. Taro's hunting instincts grew sharper as he learned to stalk his prey with patience and precision. He practiced pouncing, his powerful limbs propelling him through the air as he took down deer and wild boar. But the thrill of the hunt was fleeting, the satisfaction of his victories overshadowed by the emptiness that followed. Each night, He would find a secluded spot beneath the stars and curl up tightly, his tail wrapped around his body, his eyes drifting shut as he tried to imagine Bella's warmth beside him. But dreams were cruel, and every morning he would wake alone, his heart heavy with loneliness. Ethan watched from a distance, his binoculars trained on the magnificent tiger as he moved through the jungle. Taro was thriving, his body growing stronger, his movements more confident. He was becoming the predator he was born to be. But Ethan could see the pain in his eyes, the longing that never faded. Taro would often stop in his tracks, his head lifting as he looked back towards the rescue center, his body tense with indecision. It broke Ethan's heart to see him so torn, his loyalty divided between the wild world he belonged to and the family he had left behind. Bella was suffering too. She had stopped eating, her body growing thinner as she paced restlessly around the enclosure, her eyes fixed on the gate as if waiting for Taro to come bounding through. She would lie down in their favorite corner, her head resting on her paws, her ears perked as she listened for the roar that never came. Her puppies would nuzzle against her, seeking comfort. But Bella's attention was always elsewhere, her heart lost to the son she could no longer protect. Ethan spent countless nights sitting with her, his fingers combing through her fur as he whispered reassurances he didn't believe. "He's safe, Bella. He's learning to be wild, to be free, just like he was meant to." But Bella's eyes remained fixed on the gate, her spirit fading with each passing day. Weeks turned into months, and Taro adapted to his new life. He became the ruler of his territory, his roar echoing across the valley as he marked his domain. Other predators learned to fear him, giving way whenever he approached. He was a king, powerful and majestic, his presence commanding respect. But the crown was heavy, and his heart was still bound by love. No matter how far he roamed, no matter how strong he became, Taro couldn't escape the longing that haunted him. He would find himself standing on the ridge overlooking the rescue center, his eyes locked on the distant buildings, his body trembling with the urge to return. But fear held him back, fear of rejection, of finding that Bella had moved on, that his place by her side had been taken by another. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Taro heard a sound that shattered his resolve. It was faint, carried by the wind, but unmistakable. Bella's howl. It was filled with pain, with longing, with grief. It was a mother's call, a cry for her lost child. Taro's heart seized, his body freezing as the sound washed over him, his mind flooding with memories of Bella's warm fur, her gentle licks, her protective embrace. He couldn't take it anymore. With a roar that shook the trees, Taro raced down the mountainside, his powerful legs carrying him towards the rescue center, his body moving with a speed he didn't know he possessed. The night was still when Taro arrived, his chest heaving as he stood before the enclosure, his massive frame hidden by the shadows. Bella was lying in her usual spot, her body curled tightly, her breathing shallow. She looked smaller, frailer, her spirit broken by loss. Taro's heart shattered at the sight, his eyes stinging with tears as he let out a soft, mournful growl. Bella's head shot up, her ears perking as she turned toward the sound, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stood, her body trembling, her nose twitching as she caught his scent. And then she saw him. Taro stepped out of the shadows, his golden eyes shining with love and sorrow. Bella let out a cry, her body launching towards him as her paws hit the fence, her tail wagging furiously, her whimpers filled with joy. Taro pressed his massive head against the bars, his rough tongue licking her face, his purrs vibrating through his chest as Bella licked him back, her body wiggling with excitement. They stayed like that for hours, their faces pressed together, their eyes never leaving each other. It was as if time had stopped, the world fading away as mother and son reunited, their hearts mending with every touch. Ethan found them at dawn, his chest tightening as he watched Taro curled up outside the fence, Bella sleeping beside him, her body pressed against the bars. He knew then that they were inseparable, that no force of nature could break their bond. Taro was wild, powerful, untamed, but his heart was Bella's, and no jungle could change that. Ethan wiped his eyes, a smile breaking through his tears as he whispered, "Welcome home, Taro." From that day on, Taro became a bridge between two worlds. He roamed the jungle by day, hunting and exploring, embracing his wildness. But every night, he returned to Bella, curling up beside the fence, his golden eyes watching over his family as they slept. The visitors at the rescue center marveled at the sight, a tiger and a dog separated by iron bars but united by love. Taro had found his place, his heart at peace, his spirit whole. He was both wild and tamed, both predator and son. And as he lay beside Bella, his purrs blending with her gentle snores, Taro knew he was finally home. This story is a powerful reminder that love knows no boundaries, and family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds of the heart. Taro and Bella's journey shows us that even the most unlikely connections can create unbreakable ties. Their relationship defied the laws of nature, proving that compassion and acceptance can bridge any divide. Taro grew strong because of Bella's love, and Bella found renewed purpose through Taro's presence. Together, they taught us that true family is about loyalty, devotion, and the willingness to protect those we love, no matter how different they may seem. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. We hope this story touched your heart and inspired you to see the beauty in all forms of love and family. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more heartwarming tales of courage, friendship, and hope, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.